Hi, this is my game called 112 Jump. It's a version of the famous mobile game called Doodle Jump created by the combination of skills I've learned throughout 112. It's on almost every topic, including conditionals, iterations, loops, lists, sets, animations, object-oriented programming, and recursion. For the project itself, I split it up into a couple different files, and I imported them all into the main right here. And for the most complex parts to begin, probably had to be the gravity class. I have a method called falling, which affects the player at all times, and it takes the y position, y velocity, the acceleration, and the time, uses these to calculate the change in y, and then it also calculates the change in velocity, and it returns a new y position and a new y velocity. Next part were the platform spawners, and I separated them into two different ones. The first one was an initial platform spawner that at the time, when the time equals 0, it created an initial map. And here's the desired number of platforms, and it started with the empty list. And this is the base case. Once it reaches that desired number of platforms, it would return the list. But until then, it would check to see where the highest platform was. And then from the highest platform, it would spawn one about 20 to the max y distance above it. And then the x value would be anywhere from 50 to 550. I'd use random.random int to randomly spawn it, and then it would recursively go through until this was 15 long, and they would put it into the main. The next part was the infinite spawner, and this was almost exactly like the initial map spawner, except that it only checks to see if any platforms were above the playable screen. So if any of the y values of any platforms were less than 0, and if there weren't any that were less than 0, then it would spawn 5 platforms at a time using the same logic as the previous one. Next was the difficulty. And for the difficulty, as you go higher, it gets more difficult because the platforms spawn further away from each other. And then eventually it becomes, if you get high enough, then the blue platforms, which are the moving one, become more prevalent than the static ones, the green ones. I use some rectangular collisions throughout this project, some buttons, and both of those required some like invisible shapes behind images. And then for movement for the player, I use some sets. And for the monster, I use some parametric functions. And for keeping score, I use a read and write file function from the 112 website, but I also created my own recursive function with a wrapper and recursive helper to create a top 10 list. So before you play the game, you should go to keyboard, and I included the directions in the README, and you want to go to repeat, delay, and turn it to long, repeat, rate, and turn it to slow, click OK, and you can press Command B to play. You should let it load a little bit. Here's the thing. You have to make sure that you release inside the button to play. And yeah, just try and jump as high as you can. You can shoot the monsters to make them disappear. And the spring gives you extra bounce. But then, as you see here, if you hit the monster, you become dazed. And then you can't touch the platforms anymore. And it plays a sound that you fell. And then the game is over. And here you can click right here to enter your name if you think you made it into the top 10 list. And then if you go to the main screen again, you can click this to see the top 10 jumpers. And that's my game.